Hey guys, tonight we're gonna time travel way back before smartphones, before electricity, before anyone had ever tasted a taco. You're gonna wake up as a medieval serf. Yep, congratulations. It's the year 1323 and your entire life revolves around mud, millet and mild back pain. You're curled up on a lumpy mattress stuffed with straw and mice, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket that somehow smells like both goat and despair. The rooster didn't crow today because a fox ate it last week, but who needs alarms when your joints scream you awake? Outside, mist clings to the thatch roofs like a ghost that never left. Your breath fogs in front of your face, and as you shove open the wooden door that never quite latches, your bare feet sink into thick mud. Morning dew? Nope, just cold cow pee. But before you can fully take in the beautiful grey wasteland that is your home, you see it. Your ox. The only one. The one that helps you plow, haul and basically survive. It's lying down in the field, very still, very stiff, very dead. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and the time you're listening. I love knowing where in the world you are when you tune in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge over to the lifeless lump of fur and muscle and give it a little kick. Nothing. No last heave. No twitch. Not even a fly swat. You mutter something that rhymes with duck under your breath, but gently, this is a family-friendly nightmare. And here's the kicker. The ox wasn't even yours. Like everything else in your life, it technically belonged to your lord, a guy you've probably only seen twice, once during tax season and once when he sneezed on you at Christmas. Now you're standing ankle deep in sludge, staring down at what historians still argue was the medieval serf's most valuable tool. Not a plough, not a shovel, an ox. Without it you can't till the soil, which means no planting, which means no food, which means, you guessed it, no, not dying. Your neighbors peek from behind their wattle and daub hovels, not out of concern, but because medieval life is about 80% passive eavesdropping. Old Marjorie hobbles by with her basket of stale leeks, muttering something about a bad moon and a bloated belly. Thanks, Marjorie. You try to remember what the village priest said last Sunday. Something about trials from God. You didn't expect divine testing to come in bovine form, but hey, medieval theology is like that. Besides, oxen were basically medieval Teslas, quiet, powerful and impossible to replace without selling a kidney. The only difference, oxen didn't require charging, unless you count barley. You kneel beside it, hand on its horn. You whisper a few words. Maybe it's a prayer. Maybe it's just you swearing at a universe that let a cow die before breakfast. You try to tug it up by the neck. Bad idea. It shifts maybe an inch before your spine files an official protest. Nearby, a rooster finally crows. Late. Useless. You glance back at your cottage, a smoky, wheezing structure that looks like a strong sneeze could flatten it. Your children are probably still curled on the floor, dreaming of bread that isn't just bark and oats. You need to act fast. The fields won't plow themselves. There's no tractor coming. There's not even a donkey in sight. Without that ox, you're not just doomed. You're very boringly, sleepily doomed. One fringe historian once wrote that some serfs in remote villages turned to goats for plowing in emergencies. Goats. Let that image lull you for a second. Stubborn, short, slightly evil goats dragging a plow as the villagers laugh, cry in despair. You don't have a goat. You don't even have a wheelbarrow. As the sun rises, dim and reluctant, you rise too, with no breakfast, no plan. Just muddy socks and a vague sense of peasant panic. The Lord's manor looms in the distance, its stone walls smug in the morning light. You'll have to go there, you'll have to tell him. But first you cover the ox's face with a sack, out of respect maybe, or shame, or just to avoid eye contact. The chickens peck around it already, as if sensing opportunity. Nature is cruel, and poultry even more so. With a sigh that could sink a long ship, you begin the long squelchy walk up the hill to your feudal overlord's hall, rehearsing what you'll say. Something respectful, something desperate, Something that maybe, just maybe, will get you another ox, or a mule, or a particularly muscular pig. But don't hold your breath. You're a serf after all. You don't make choices. You make do, and right now, do is looking pretty grim. You trudge up the path toward the manor, which is really just a drafty stone rectangle with delusions of grandeur. The mud thickens as you go, and each step sounds like someone stirring porridge in slow motion. Birds chirp, probably laughing at you. Your legs ache before you even reach the top of the hill. The manor gates aren't exactly majestic, more like two warped wooden doors that shriek like tortured banshees when they creak open. You pass under the archway and brace yourself, because now you have to tell the Lord. Sir Walter de something or other isn't your friend. He's not even your acquaintance. He's a vaguely intimidating figure you once watched spit roast quail while everyone else chewed turnip stew. Technically he owns the land, the ox, your cottage, and a portion of your soul. He also has bad breath and an even worse temper. You know this because he once threw a spoon at a bard for rhyming goose with juice. One of his guards, a large man with surprisingly delicate eyelashes, stops you at the door. What do you want? My ox is dead, you say. He stares. The Lord's ox, you add. Now that gets his attention. Soon you're inside the great hall. The fire crackles, tapestries hang limp, and the air smells like wine, sweat, and boiled onions. Sir Walter lounges on a chair that could double as a siege weapon. His dog, a lanky, twitchy greyhound, growls like it's thinking of eating your kneecaps. You clear your throat. My lord, the ox that tills my land has died in the night. He squints at you as though you've just asked to marry his daughter, and he finally mutters, "And I can't plough the field," you say, carefully not adding duh. Sir Walter sighs the sigh of a man burdened by peasants and indigestion. You'll have to sort it. Sort it, you repeat. Yes, sort it. Get another one. Share. Improvise. That's what you peasants do, isn't it? Solve things in that resourceful little way. Your face does something between a grimace and a nod. Historians still argue whether medieval lords were indifferent or merely wildly out of touch, and right now you're leaning toward both. You suppress the urge to say anything clever. Cleverness gets you whipped. But my land, you start. Is my land, he cuts in. Touché. He waves a hand like he's swatting a fly that owes him rent. Talk to the reeve. Of course, the reeve, the village tattletale in official capacity, equal parts accountant, snitch, and minor demon. You back away, bowing a little too many times, and practically reverse out the door. The guard gives you a sympathetic shrug, or maybe it's just a twitch, hard to tell under all that chainmail. You return to the village with no ox, no plan, and the distinct feeling of being a very small cog in a very large, uncaring wheel. And guess who's waiting for you? The reeve, Oswin. He's always waiting, like a medieval parking inspector with a vendetta. He's standing by the stocks, chewing on something that might be a turnip or a large wart. Hard to say. Lord says you're oxless, he says. I am, you reply. Well, he drawls, we do have an arrangement for that. Hope stirs in your chest, which is, you owe 2 more days of unpaid labor this week, and a chicken. Your soul sags. You briefly consider throwing a handful of mud at him, but remember that stocks are cold and public. Also, you don't have a change of tunic. Instead, you nod and walk away. As you pass by your sad oxless field, you notice something new. Hoofprints. Fresh ones. Not from your ox. Bigger. Someone's been through here with livestock. And not yours. Your neighbor Wulfric is in his field next door, humming what might be a hymn or a threat. He's got 2 oxen. He always has 2. You've seen him with them. You've envied him with them. You call out, "Wulfric, could I borrow one?" He doesn't answer, just squints and whistles louder. Passive aggression is the village's favorite sport. You'll have to get creative. Back at your hovel, your eldest child is trying to sew a sock using a thorn and something that used to be wool. The other kids sit beside the hearth, gnawing on a root you hope is edible. The dog, also not yours, is sleeping in your spot. You explain the situation. So we die? Your daughter asks. Maybe not, you answer. trying to sound optimistic. Your youngest offers to pretend to be an ox. Sweet. Doomed. Spine-shattering. But sweet. You lay awake that night, staring at the smoke-stained ceiling, wondering how far one can carry a plow without an animal. You consider rigging up a sled. You wonder if old Marjorie might lend you a goat. You remember the way the Lord said improvise and want to throw a turnip at his tapestry. And somewhere, out in the misty dark, the village bell tolls. Someone else just lost something. Maybe it's not just you. Maybe that's worse. Morning breaks with a groan rather than a glow. The sky's a slab of wet wool, and the air smells like old cabbage and resignation. You roll off your straw mattress, which does a spectacular job of being neither soft nor dry, and land feet first onto a splinter. That's what you get for sleeping barefoot. Again, breakfast is porridge. Again, more accurately, it's the memory of porridge, mostly water, with a passing whisper of oats. One child finds a pebble and pretends its flavor. You step outside to assess the damage. The field looks larger today. Isn't that interesting? It's like the absence of the ox makes everything else swell in size, especially the problems. The plow sits there, silently mocking you, its handles still caked with yesterday's efforts and your tears. The mud seems deeper now, more aggressive, like it knows. You need a plan, and fast, because the window for planting barley is as tight as your bootstraps. Miss it, and you don't eat come winter. You'd think the weather might cooperate, but no, it's been raining just enough to soak everything, and dry just enough to make the soil hard as smug Reeve logic. So you go hunting for solutions. First stop, old Marjorie. She's the village herbalist, midwife, bone setter, and general cause of rumors. She once supposedly healed a cow with a chant and a spoonful of fermented beetroot. She also once lit a fire without flint, or so her nephew claims, which is why people tend to avoid eye contact unless they need her, and you definitely need her. You shuffle up to her crooked hut, dodging the goose that guards her like a feathery Cerberus. I'm not ill, you say as she opens the door. Shame, she replies. That's usually more interesting. My ox died. Need help tilling. Thought, maybe you had an idea. She narrows her eyes, which are the color of tired storm clouds. Historians still argue whether peasant communities leaned more on folklore or sheer desperation. I say, why not both? Not exactly comforting. She offers you a tonic that smells like wet socks and honey. You're not sure if it's to help you work faster or forget why you need to. Either way, you gulp it down and hope it doesn't pickle your kidneys. No magical livestock appears, at least not immediately. Second stop, the tanner, Godfrey. He's gruff, smells like death, and is surprisingly chatty once you bring up trade. He has a donkey. It's ancient, possibly haunted, and very definitely not strong enough to pull a plow. Could borrow it. He shrugs. If you promise to bring back some bark from the forest, you nod. Of course there's a string attached. There's always a string, probably made of goat hair and lies. So now you're in the forest, alone, with a tiny axe, a bag for bark, and a growing sense that maybe medieval life was less romantic and more relentless. The trees creak, birds squawk. Somewhere in the underbrush, a badger does something territorial. You scrape bark from willow trunks, careful not to get the wrong kind. You once heard about a man who collected elm by mistake and hallucinated himself into a beehive. As you work, you wonder if you've made a terrible deal. What if the donkey collapses halfway through your field? What if Godfrey decides he wants more bark next time? Or your boots? Or one of your fewer expendable children? You return just as the sun begins to sink behind the manor's pointed roofline. The donkey is tied to a post, munching something that could be hay or just sun-dried weeds. You lead it home. It walks slower than fog. Its eyes look in two different directions and it wheezes like a teapot in denial. But it walks. For now. That night, your family eats soup. It's mostly broth, but someone found a beet. Morale skyrockets. The next morning, you hitch the donkey to the plow. It stands there, doing nothing. You whisper encouragements. You nudge. You bribe it with a turnip. You consider singing. Finally it moves. The plow scrapes the ground like it's pulling teeth. The donkey farts. This is your life now. Your neighbors stop by to watch. Some offer tips, most just gawk. Wulfric smirks. You resist the urge to weaponize a carrot. By noon, you furrowed exactly 3 feet. Your shoulders are screaming, your hands are blistered, and the donkey looks like it might have a spiritual awakening right there in the mud. Still, it's something. In the afternoon, the sky decides it's had enough of your optimism and releases a drizzle so lazy it feels like the weather itself is sighing. The mud becomes less resistant crust and more slippery betrayal. The donkey slips. You slip. The plow tips sideways. You sit there, covered in earth, watching a snail pass judgment from a nearby leaf. Why are we like this? You ask the snail. It doesn't answer. Rude. Eventually you get up, straighten the plow and try again, and again, and again. Because what else can you do? That night, as you limp inside, your eldest presents you with a drawing of a new ox. It's anatomically horrifying and strangely muscular. You pin it to the wall anyway. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings. Tomorrow, you tell yourself. Tomorrow you'll plow farther, or the donkey will explode. Either way, it's something. You wake up to an unfamiliar silence. For a brief, delicious moment, you think, maybe, just maybe, the donkeys run away, and you've been granted an unexpected holiday. But then you remember, there are no holidays, only obligations that dress up as days. You stumble outside and find the donkey standing exactly where you left it. Sleeping, upright, eyes open, possibly dead. You prod it gently. It snorts and looks vaguely insulted. Fine, still alive. You begin again. The plow drags, the mud clings, and your legs ache in new and exciting ways. By mid-morning you've managed another row, though it curves wildly to the left, like it's trying to escape the field altogether. Your neighbor Alric walks by and tilts his head. Drunk furrows, he asks. Experimental geometry, you reply. You keep going, because you must. The planting windows narrow like trying to thread a needle while blindfolded and being pecked by geese. The manor expects its dues, your family expects food, and the donkey expects, well, not much. It seems content to exist so long as you let it chew between steps. Around midday, your hands are raw, your back's a tight coil of regret, and you wonder if this was how giants felt when they were forced to dig their own graves. Then a thought strikes. Maybe you can borrow help, not just animals but people. You wipe your forehead with your sleeve, an act which only moves mud from one place to another, and shuffle off to find Oswin, your cousin by marriage and occasional accomplice in regrettable ideas. He once tried to start a side hustle selling carved spoons shaped like saints. It failed, dramatically. Still, he's strong, has no ox of his own, and owes you for not telling the reeve about that time he got caught impersonating a friar for free ale. You find him near the alehouse, carving a stick into what may be a spoon or a weapon. Fancy a day's labor for a warm turnip stew and minimal shouting, you ask. He squints. Are you supplying the shouting? Always. He agrees. Together you return to the field. Oswin harnesses himself to the plow like a noble draft animal, or a very confused punishment victim. You guide. The donkey watches, clearly amused. It's not fast, it's not even efficient, but it's progress. The rows begin to take shape, crooked, shallow, but definitely rows. Historians still argue whether serfs often cooperated like this or whether mutual loathing prevented teamwork. Today you prove the hopeful ones right. After a few hours you break for rest under a tree. Oswin mutters something about his spine being permanently bent, and you both snack on rough bread and sharp cheese that could also serve as a blunt weapon. As you eat, you talk, not just about the plow or the donkey, though that's a recurring theme, but about life. About how old Wulfgith's daughter just got betrothed to a boy who smells like onions. About how the Lord's Reeve supposedly has a secret stash of imported honey. About whether heaven really involves harp music or just an endless nap. It's a reminder you're not just toiling in mud, you're part of something. A strange sweaty community held together by gossip, shared aches and the occasional goose attack. The next day, Oswin brings his brother, then another cousin. Soon there are 5 of you working in shifts, rotating between ploughing, guiding and yelling at the donkey. It becomes a strange little ritual, a laboring rhythm underscored by complaints and inside jokes. You assign the donkey an honorary title, Sir Flatulence of Mudshire. He remains unimpressed. By week's end the field is ploughed, not beautifully, not evenly, but done. Your family celebrates with bread and bean stew, and someone even finds a shriveled apple for dessert. The children pretend it's a royal feast. You pretend your arms don't feel like cooked noodles. As the sun sets, you stand at the edge of your field. There's satisfaction in the furrows, in their stubborn crookedness, in the way they defy the odds. You did that. You, your borrowed friends, and a donkey with the attitude of a retired bishop. Of course, ploughing's only the first step. Now you have to plant. You begin the next morning, seeds in a sack tied around your waist, moving down the rows with purpose. It's quiet work, almost meditative, until your youngest sneaks up behind you and startles you into spilling half a row of barley in one spot. You decide that patch will be the special zone. Throughout the week, planting continues. The donkey is officially retired from ploughing duty, and now serves as mobile moral support. You suspect it's actually just napping upright. The community buzzes with similar activity. Seeds are being sown. Hope sprouts thin and nervous like a hedgehog in a thunderstorm. Everyone's watching the skies, reading the clouds, muttering to saints. The village priest throws extra holy water at the fields just in case. One morning, as you plant the final row, the reeve stops by. He's wearing his usual expression, like someone just whispered an insult in Latin. He surveys your work. Managed without an ox? He asks, eyebrow raised. Managed, you reply. He grunts, possibly a compliment. Then he hands you a notice. It's a list of dues, grain owed, labor expected, and a tax whose name might be made up. You tuck it away. Later problem. As you pat the final mound of earth, you realize something. You survived the oxless ploughing. You didn't collapse. You didn't starve. You didn't trade a child for livestock. Though Oswin still owes you 1 turnip stew, and now it's up to the weather, the soil, the will of something bigger. You lie back on the edge of your field, sun warming your face, donkey snoring behind you. For now, just this moment, you allow yourself to rest. Your moment of rest is brief, because rest in the medieval peasant world is more of an idea than an actual experience. The field's been ploughed, the seeds are in, but that doesn't mean your work is over. It just transforms. Like how a nightmare about drowning becomes one about falling, different panic, same result. You wake the next morning to the sound of distant bells, not church bells, though those ring incessantly, but cowbells. Someone's cows have wandered into someone else's field. The yelling starts. You hear accusations of witchcraft, curses involving turnips, and a threat to write a strongly worded letter, if anyone could write. You roll out of bed with a grunt and face your latest task, protecting your precious newly sown field from 1,000 tiny threats. Pigs, chickens, geese, jealous neighbors, children with sticks, wind, hail, and the occasional rain that's not gentle and poetic, but aggressive and vengeful, like the skies trying to erase your efforts one drop at a time. You rig up a scarecrow. It's mostly old rags tied to a stick, wearing a hat that used to belong to your grandfather and smells like medieval despair. Does it work? Who knows? The crows seem more amused than frightened, and one of them sits on its shoulder every morning like it's waiting for tea service. Still, you try. You tie bits of metal to rattle in the wind, post your children at the field's edge with instructions to yell at anything with feathers, and station the donkey, Sir Flatulence himself, nearby as an accidental deterrent. He doesn't move, but he does occasionally make a sound that drives off smaller wildlife, and at least one traveling juggler. You spend your days maintaining your patch, pulling weeds, checking for signs of growth. One morning you spot the tiniest green sprout emerging like a very cautious hope. You nearly weep. Then your youngest steps on it, To be fair, he was pretending to be a dragon. It was an emotional day for everyone. You gently recover the injured sprout and whisper apologies to it, promising better days. You also move the dragon play acting to the barn. At night you can't help but wonder what would have happened if you had just stopped. After the ox died, given up, said, "Nope, this is clearly a sign from heaven that I'm meant to become a traveling lute player." But deep down you know the truth in your world. Giving up isn't really an option. It's just a slower road to disaster. Still, there are quiet triumphs. The barley begins to take root. The beans sprout. Your potatoes, the hardy little warriors of medieval farming, are doing all right, despite being planted slightly sideways because of a minor mix-up involving your cousin, a wheelbarrow, and a suspiciously tipsy priest. Each sprout feels like a victory. Each green shoot, a whisper from the land saying, "Fine. You've suffered enough for now." Your neighbors start to talk, not in whispers or judgment, but in admiration. Word spreads, slowly, like molasses crawling uphill, that you managed to sow your field without an ox, and didn't even collapse into a ditch afterward. Old Helga from across the lane stops by and offers you an extra candle as thanks for inspiring her son, who's been unusually motivated since your donkey scandal. He even washed his tunic, she says, twice. One evening, as you sit sharpening a hoe under the stars, romantic if you ignore the blisters, Oswin plops beside you with a satisfied sigh. "You know," he says, "we should start a business." "Oh no," you reply instantly. "No, hear me out. We lend ourselves out. Human plow team. The two-legged oxman. It has a ring." You consider it, briefly, then remember what your spine felt like after day 3. Hard pass. Still the thought lingers. Maybe, just maybe, this disaster brought something with it. A reminder that people can surprise you, that you can surprise yourself. Of course there are complications, always. One morning you discover someone's goats have broken in and eaten half a row of your beans. You trace the goats back to the Reeves cousin, who insists they just wandered and have refined tastes. You respond with a dead stare and suggest he feed them pages from the manor records next time. Historians still argue whether serfs had any real recourse in these disputes. Technically you can appeal to the manor court. In practice the Reeve controls that court, so you settle for muttering dramatic threats under your breath and planting new beans. Meanwhile the manor itself is humming with anticipation. The Lord Steward has started showing up in the fields, poking around, asking questions like, "How's your yield looking? And would you like to prepay your tithes in case of rain?" You respond by offering him some turnip stew. He declines suspiciously. Midway through the season something unexpected happens. Your neighbor's ox recovers. It was never dead, just colicky, or possibly possessed depending on who you ask. Either way, it's walking again, though with a slight limp and the haunted look of an animal who's seen things. They offer to lend it to you as a gesture of goodwill. You consider it, politely, then decline. Not because you're ungrateful, but because you've already adapted, rebuilt, created a weird but working system. The donkey, the borrowed hands, the shaky scarecrow wearing ancestral sadness. This is your method now. You've survived the worst. You're in the uncertain middle now, and the middle is manageable. And so, the planting season slips into the background like a forgotten song. And now it's time for the next great medieval mystery, waiting. Because after all that back-breaking work, you now have to rely on time, weather, and the hope that a sheep doesn't suddenly develop a taste for legumes. Farming, it turns out, is mostly just stress in slow motion. You check your fields constantly. You tell yourself you're just passing by, but who are you kidding? You've memorized the angle of every leaf. You spot a new sprout like it's a royal herald. You panic over brown spots with the intensity of a parent checking chicken pox. You're not alone in this anxious vigil. The whole village hovers between tension and tedium. There's very little to do now except for weeding, reinforcing fences, fixing leaks in the roof that somehow only appear when it rains, and attending to all the things you ignored while your ox-free farming crusade consumed your soul. One such thing is your boots, or, more accurately, the leather rags clinging desperately to your feet and pretending to be footwear. You finally repair them using piggut thread and sheer optimism, hoping they'll last until the harvest. Spoiler, they won't. You've begun to develop a kind of sixth sense for danger too. You know when rain is coming by the smell in the air, the shape of the clouds, and the way the village dogs all run under the church awning as if they've read tomorrow's weather scroll. On one particular afternoon, the sky darkens in that ominous, overachieving way it sometimes does. Not the soft grey drizzle that waters the crops, but the deep, bruised purple clouds that say, "I'm about to ruin your week." You sprint to the fields, covering seedlings with makeshift shelters, old thatch, a broken door, and at one point your own tunic, which you later regret when someone's goat runs off with it. The storm hits hard, rain lashes sideways, the wind flattens a corner of your barley like a drunken haircut, but you weather it. Barely. The next day you walk the rows barefoot, your toes sinking into the slick earth, inspecting the damage. Some losses, not total. Your beans survive. The potatoes thrive, because of course they do. They're basically edible rocks. A few barley heads are bent but not broken. You gently prop them up with little stakes, whispering encouragement like they're battle-worn soldiers returning from the front. Later you share storm stories with neighbors. Helga's roof collapsed. Oswin caught a flying bucket with his face. The manor reeve got knocked over by a surprised goose and insists it was sabotage. You all laugh, which is rare, and feels like stolen joy. Despite the uncertainty, there's beauty. In the golden twilight after the storm, you see your field sparkling with beads of water clinging to fresh shoots. The air smells of soil and rain and maybe hope. You don't say that out loud. Not because you're not poetic, but because saying hope in a medieval village invites suspicion that you've been into the cider again. One quirky tidbit you pick up from old Aldred the Tanner, who may or may not be making this up, is that some peasants bury a carved potato with a coin for good luck during a rough season. You scoff, but find yourself doing it anyway, half out of desperation, half out of a growing belief that luck might actually be something you can court if you're weird enough. Days stretch into weeks. You shift from active labor to careful management. You trap mice. You chase birds. You set up a scare bag, like a scarecrow, but it's just a bag filled with pebbles that makes an unsettling noise when jostled. Surprisingly effective. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly believed in crop magic or just went along with the rituals out of habit. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. You do what you can with what you have, and sometimes that means singing to the beans when no one's looking. Meanwhile, you become more observant. You notice patterns, the way dew forms differently on wheat than on barley, the way certain birds gather in advance of a weather shift. You learn the rhythm of the land, not because someone taught you, but because you're paying attention in a way you never did before. When you had an ox, things just moved. Now you're part of it. You also start noticing things about the manor, about the steward's sudden visits, about the way grain storage is being counted early this year. You overhear whispers at the mill, something about taxes being adjusted and new levies on the way. You frown, knowing that when the Lord says adjust, he usually means increase, but there's little you can do about that now. So you focus on what's in your control. Your family begins to relax a little. Your youngest stops pretending to be a dragon and starts pretending to be a priest, which you think is a lateral move. Your spouse, no longer worried you'll collapse from ploughing, spends more time weaving and patching. The household runs with the steady hum of cautious optimism. One afternoon, Oswin shows up at your door with a splintered cart axle and the world's most pitiful expression. You patch it up together under the sun, laughing over shared blisters and debating which is worse, wet boots or no boots. It's a toss-up. That night you dream of fields, not as a place of toil, but as green oceans swaying in rhythm, each stalk a note in some slow ancient music. You wake up feeling oddly peaceful. You step outside. The stars are so clear you can almost reach up and tilt one. The silence is full, not empty. The wind brushes your skin, and for a moment you think maybe, just maybe, this strange oxless season is going to work out after all. The days roll forward with the slow determination of a cart on a muddy road, and soon you're no longer wondering if the crops will grow, but whether you'll get to keep any of them, because now, with green shoots high and the grain heavy in its head, comes the Lord's reeve, and he is inspecting. You see him before he sees you, cloak billowing, ledger in hand, and a frown deep enough to plant turnips in. He makes his rounds with a dramatic sniff, like he's personally offended by the existence of dirt. You watch him pause at your barley, squinting in that bureaucratic way that says he's not here for facts, he's here for fractions. He scratches something into his parchment with a quill that probably costs more than your entire wardrobe. And just like that, your future is less about harvesting and more about calculating how much you'll have to hand over. You nod politely when he approaches, trying not to look too successful. It's a strange medieval peasant skill, cultivating just enough misery to avoid suspicion. You smile like you've lost sleep, but not enough to draw attention from the priest. When he asks about yields, you shrug dramatically, throwing in words like unreliable and patchy and goose trampling. He leaves unimpressed, mission accomplished. Because here's the reality: you owe your lord a portion of everything. He owns the land, remember, and your place on it is about as secure as a loaf of bread at a hungry dog convention. A good harvest means bigger taxes, a bad harvest means fines for neglect. Either way, you lose. That's where tithes come in too. 1/10 of everything to the church. Not just your grain but eggs, cheese, even your herbs if you've got anything that smells vaguely holy. And of course no one really measures a tenth precisely. The priest just sort of eyeballs your generosity. You remember how your grandmother used to cheat the tithe by hiding the biggest apples at the bottom of the basket. God loves honesty, she said, but he never farmed with this priest. You're starting to agree, and now, because everything good must be followed by something mildly catastrophic, the village whispers about purveyance. A royal official might be passing through, which means requisitioning supplies in the king's name. And no, you won't be paid. Not unless you count a nod from a guy on a horse who's never plowed a furrow in his life. There's also talk of an extra levy this year. Rumor is the Lord's building a new dovecote or expanding the manor kitchens. Either way, it involves you giving more and receiving, well, you're not sure what you're receiving. A sense of mild outrage mostly. Historians still argue whether medieval lords were deliberately oppressive or just so disconnected from peasant life that their demands felt monstrous without intending to be. Either way, you've got to work around it. So you start hiding things. Not all of them, that would be obvious. Just enough. You keep a few sacks in the old root cellar you told the steward collapsed. You dry herbs in bundles behind the smokehouse and hope the priest doesn't look up. You give your neighbor a few chickens to mind for you, a barter of sorts, since you're watching his cider barrel in return. You're becoming sneaky, cunning, a little too comfortable lying with a straight face. You're not sure if that's personal growth or moral decay, maybe both. And then there's the harvest feast. Not your feast, mind you. That comes later if you're lucky. This is the Lord's harvest banquet, which you are absolutely not invited to, but you're definitely expected to contribute to. A goose, some ale, maybe a side of salted beef if you happen to be wildly prosperous. You give up a jug of your best mead and try not to cry when the steward drops it while loading the cart. Later you hear the music drifting from the manor like a memory you didn't make. Fiddles, laughter, clinking cups. You and your family eat broth and onions. You tell jokes. You pretend not to care. In a quieter moment you start building a mental tally. How much have you given? How much will you keep? It's not looking great. You do the math on your fingers, then switch to tally marks on the wall. It still doesn't look great. But here's the weird part. You're not panicking. Maybe it's because you've already survived the worst, remember the ox. Or maybe because there's a secret dignity in surviving all this nonsense with your humor intact. One day you run into Father Wulfric while carrying a sack of barley. He squints, asks if you've been generous with God lately. You tell him God and you are working on a sliding scale this season. He doesn't laugh, but his eyebrows twitch, so that's a win. And still the crops grow. One quirky quirky little tradition pops up around this time, villagers weaving little corn dollies from the first or last stalks harvested, supposed to bring good fortune and keep the spirit of the grain safe over winter. Yours ends up looking like a deformed duck, but you keep it anyway. It feels like it means something. In the evenings the village gathers for quiet talks. You swap stories, plans, maybe a bit of gossip about who's courting who and whether it'll lead to marriage or just awkward goat-related poetry. You trade eggs for firewood. You laugh at Oswin's terrible singing. And slowly, amid the taxation, the rules, the debts, you realize something. You've held on to enough. Maybe not plenty, but enough. Enough to keep your family fed. Enough to trade for a new pair of boots when these ones give up completely. Enough to seed next year, assuming no more storms, no more decrees, and definitely no more ox casualties. You sit by the fire and let yourself breathe for the first time in months. It's not triumph, not exactly, but it's survival. And in the medieval world, that's more than most can ask for. Now that you've stashed what you can, given what you must, and offered your best mead to a feast you didn't attend, the seasons roll onward. The air shifts. Leaves dry and skitter across the packed dirt like tiny fleeing mice. Autumn's gold is turning brittle brown, and with it comes the realization that your job as a serf is never really done, because now you must pay in labor, not just goods. Specifically, it's time for corvée, unpaid labor owed to your lord, and it's not optional. You don't clock in or sign a contract. You just show up, or you get fined, shamed, or worse, put in the stocks, where passing children can pelt you with turnips and unsolicited life advice. This week's job? Helping rebuild the manor's back wall, which was knocked loose by that storm last year and conveniently ignored until now. The irony, you're not qualified. You've never even seen a proper mason at work. Your go-to building strategy is stack things until they don't fall. Still, you're handed a wooden mallet and pointed at a pile of damp stones, like that's going to end in anything but bruised thumbs and creative swearing under your breath. The reeve, who's supervising today with all the enthusiasm of a man watching bread rise, tells you to look busy. So, you do what every self-respecting serf has learned to do. You perfect the art of fake labor. Move one stone, sigh meaningfully, take a long drink of water, repeat. It's less dishonest than it is survival instinct. And here's the kicker, this labor isn't just on the Lord's estate. You might be called to mend roads, dig drainage ditches, or, on particularly joyful occasions, construct a fish pond so that the local baron can contemplate his reflection next to a smug trout. Historians still argue whether corvée labor was more burdensome in rural areas or towns. The answer may be yes. You're pulled away from your own fields, your own tasks, and heaven forbid it rain while you're off building someone else's hay barn. Your wheat doesn't wait for your return, it molds. Your animals don't understand the phrase serving the realm. They just get hungry. And here's where the absurdity really sets in. One of your fellow laborers is Oswin, the guy whose singing sounds like a rooster falling down a chimney. He's been put in charge of hauling stones up a ladder. You make a mental note not to walk near the wall for a while. A fringe detail you overhear from one of the older peasants. Apparently some villagers in other parts of the realm have managed to bribe their way out of corvée. They pay a small fee instead, and the Lord hires laborers. You ask if that could happen here. Your neighbor laughs so hard he spills his onion broth. With this lord, he wheezes. The good news, if you squint really hard and lower your standards, is that after corvée labor the reeve sometimes rewards you with a half day to go tend your own stuff. The bad news is that, by the time that half day comes around, your legs feel like boiled reeds, and your back is plotting a rebellion. You return home in the twilight, mud-caked in places mud has no business being. Your child hands you a lopsided pine cone as a gift. You accept it with more gratitude than you had for the last 5 meals. Evenings after corvée are oddly sacred. No one expects you to do anything productive. It's one of the few times in medieval life where inertia is allowed. You sit, you eat, you stare at the fire like it owes you answers. And here's a quirky moment. Your neighbor Ralph is carving spoons, not for profit, just because it calms his nerves. He gives you one. It's uneven and vaguely sinister looking, but it's also oddly comforting. You now own something purely ornamental, and that's rare. As the week crawls along, you start hearing whispers of an upcoming inspection by the bailiff. That's different from the reeve. The bailiff's a bigger deal. He answers to the Lord and keeps tabs on the reeve. It's like watching your boss's boss come in to pretend he knows how things work. Everyone starts tidying up like a medieval version of spring cleaning. You sweep out your hut, brush the soot from the thatch, and try to hide the suspiciously untaxed basket of dried beans under your child's straw mattress. But the inspection? It's anticlimactic. The bailiff barely glances your way, makes a few notes in his leather-bound book, and compliments the manor pigs, which, to be fair, are having a banner year. One is named Sir Rootsnout by the children. He grunts proudly at the attention. Still, you know what follows: inspections, fines. It's the cycle. Labor, inspections, tithes and fines, some for real infractions, some for imaginary ones. You get fined for untidy boundaries, whatever that means, and unapproved hedgerow extensions. You try to argue but realize quickly that you are not in fact a hedgerow lawyer. But hey, one interesting thing comes out of this. Old Wilma, the woman who smells like lavender and curses in 3 languages, tells you about a loophole. If you marry your daughter off to someone from a neighboring manor, you can sometimes negotiate fewer workdays in exchange for loss of manpower. It's a weird bit of medieval matchmaking economics. You're not there yet, but you file it away for future scheming. For now though, you collapse onto your straw mattress, which pokes you in 3 places and smells faintly of goat. You listen to the night sounds, a distant owl, the creak of wood settling, the soft snore of your child curled beside you. Tomorrow it starts again, probably hauling more timber, or repairing that fence that doesn't even belong to you. But tonight there's a spoon in your hand and a pine cone on the shelf, and somehow, that's enough to ease you into sleep. Winter is breathing down your neck. The ground has gone from soft to stubborn, and the mornings no longer smell like wet grass but like smoke and cold iron. Frost crunches beneath your feet as you step outside, and the animals give you looks that say quite clearly, don't expect productivity without compensation. You nod back with mutual understanding. Remember that time your ox died, you've nearly adjusted, emotionally, if not economically. But now that the days are shorter, and your hands go numb just from carrying a pail of water, the hole left behind by that lumbering beast of burden is all the more noticeable. Winter in your village isn't festive. There are no sleigh bells, no joyful songs of snowball fights and peppermint. There's just survival, and a lot of worrying about firewood. Your tasks shift now. The land is too hard to plow, so instead, you chop and haul and patch up the holes in your walls where the wind likes to whisper in with icy gossip. If your roof leaks, tough luck. Thatch doesn't grow in December, and your ladder broke during corvée last month. Historians still argue whether medieval winters were significantly harsher due to the so-called Little Ice Age starting in the 14th century. Some say yes, some say no. You say it's cold, and that's enough. Fuel becomes your obsession. You gather sticks, you trade scraps, you even eye your own broken fence with questionable intent. Fire is warmth. Fire is food. Fire is protection from the kind of chill that makes your teeth feel loose in your head. There are moments where you think, maybe I'll burn this tax scroll as kindling. You don't, but only because the ink smells weird when it burns. Rations get strict. That cured ham you hung in the rafters, you've carved it down to the bone. The bread is mostly rye, and more air than grain. The beer, still warm, still sour, but it's calories, and it doesn't freeze solid like water. And then of course someone in the village gets sick. You hear the coughing before you see the shivering. It's Marjorie from 2 huts down. She's old but not frail, more like weathered leather. Her son comes knocking, asking for help. You bring broth. It's mostly onion water with a stray potato chunk floating like a shipwreck, but he thanks you like you've brought the royal feast. Illness in winter is as predictable as it is unfair. The church has herbs and prayers but no real medicine, and the local wise woman, who cured your chilblains with moldy bread last year, is currently on bad terms with the reeve, so no one's daring to visit her openly. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some villagers believe tying garlic cloves around the neck wards off illness. You try it. Now you smell like a pungent stew, but honestly, that's not the worst cologne in these parts. The church holds a special mass for Saint Sebastian, protector against plagues. You attend, because everyone does, and also because it's marginally warmer inside the stone nave. The priest talks of divine tests and spiritual resilience. You mostly try to keep your toes from going numb. The village mood changes in winter. Less shouting, more muttering, less laughter, more sighing into steaming mugs of barely their ale. You've grown accustomed to hardship, but this cold grinds at you, physically and emotionally. You wonder how much harder it would be with children younger than yours, or with no roof at all, or without that weird spoon Ralph carved you. But then comes Candlemas, the halfway point. February 2nd, a flicker of hope in the dark season. The priest blesses all the candles. You light one at home and swear the wax smells sweeter than usual. It doesn't, but belief is half the battle. Candlemas is also when you hear rumors again that maybe there will be a communal ox next year, one for everyone to use, shared like a blessed relic. The idea is so delightfully optimistic that you laugh out loud, and your daughter looks up from her embroidery with wide eyes. "What's funny?" she asks. You shake your head and say, "They think we'll share." But stranger things have happened, like that time the mill caught fire and actually got rebuilt with stone, or when Oswin accidentally married twins. You don't rule anything out anymore. You spend these long nights weaving. Literally, your wife threads wool through a crude loom, and you knot reed baskets so tight they squeak. Anything to keep your hands busy and your mind quieter. Sometimes you imagine your ox reincarnated as a large dog, keeping your feet warm under the table. It's a weird fantasy, but you cling to it. Then comes Lent. Oh yes, Lent, because winter wasn't already enough of a deprivation. Now you have to fast voluntarily. You try your best. You skip meat. You mumble apologies when you eat the eggs your hen so kindly laid. The church says it's for your soul. You're not sure if your soul is colder or holier, but at least the days are slowly getting longer. You pass the time trading stories with other serfs. Some claim they once saw the king's carriage ride past, all gold trim and divine arrogance. Others talk about wolves in the woods, and one insists he saw a ghost near the mill. You listen, you nod, and you tell the one about how your ox once tried to sit on a goose. It gets a chuckle, and that's something. One day you're up before dawn, and there's a strange stillness, not eerie, just calm. No wind, no frostbite in your nose, and for the first time in months you hear bird song, not just the crows, but honest to goodness finches. Spring is teasing the edge of the horizon. You close your eyes and let the sounds sink in. You'll still need to figure out a way to till the soil. You'll still owe taxes, labor and patience, but right now, there's warmth in the air and smoke in your chimney. Your child's cough has stopped. The bread is rising again, even if it still tastes like bark. You survived the worst of it, somehow. You'll even start looking for a new ox soon, or at least the bones of a plan. And if that doesn't work, there's always Ralph's spoon business. Spring finally makes its shy return. It doesn't exactly come bursting in with flowers and gentle sunshine, more like a muddy squelch and a breeze that still threatens to freeze your socks off if you stay in the shade too long. But the icicles have melted, the chickens are clucking like they own the place again, and your joints don't creak quite so dramatically when you get out of bed. And now, it's time to plant. Here's the thing about medieval farming. You don't have the luxury of skipping a season. There's no year off because you're emotionally drained or your favorite ox died in a tragic puddle-related incident. If you don't sow, you don't eat. It's that simple. So with no draft animal to drag the heavy wooden plow, you have to get inventive. You remember those rumors about a communal ox? Yeah, those have conveniently faded. No one brings it up now, and if they do, it's with that weary laugh people use when they know they're being lied to but are too tired to fight it. So you pivot. The tool you use is called a scratch plow, or adze in some areas, a simple wooden contraption that scrapes rather than turns the soil. Normally the ox would pull it while you guide, but with no ox you and your eldest son team up. One of you pulls, the other pushes and steers. It's a humiliating dance, but it sort of works. Sort of. Historians still argue whether serfs without oxen regularly relied on human ploughing, or whether communal animal access was more structured than the records suggest. But either way, you're pretty sure your back will never forgive you for this. You adjust your planting strategy. No expansive grain fields this year. You don't have the strength or the time. You opt for smaller plots with quicker crops. Beans, peas, onions, root vegetables become your heroes. They're humble, forgiving, and have the delightful habit of not dying if the weather twitches. You also dig your garden tighter to your home, partly so you can guard it, partly so you can fall directly into bed after tending it. Oh, and because your neighbor's pig has developed a taste for beets and you're not about to repeat last year's swine-pocalypse. And then there's manure. Glorious, aromatic, essential manure. Normally your ox would have contributed generously to the fertilizer department, but now your only reliable source is the communal compost pit, plus whatever the goats produce grudgingly. You ration it like treasure. Every clump spread across the field feels like you're investing in a distant, uncertain future, one carrot at a time. While planting, you use a simple stick to poke seed holes. It's called a dibber, and yours is slightly bent from last year's overly enthusiastic beet planting. Still works though. Your fingers grow blistered from the repetition, but there's something meditative about it. You jab, drop, cover, jab, drop, cover. It's like drumming with dirt. You also try companion planting. Someone told you once that onions scare off pests when planted next to lettuce. You don't even know what pests they mean, but you do it anyway. You're in the mood to experiment. You're already plowing your fields with people. What's one more oddity? Here's a quirky fact for you. Some villages believed in moon sowing, that you should plant root crops during a waning moon and leafy crops during a waxing one. You don't necessarily buy into it, but the moon is beautiful tonight and you're desperate, so sure, why not? Anything for a little extra luck. You start noticing something funny. Your kids get stronger. All that helping in the fields, all the hauling and digging and hoeing, it's turning them into small but mighty workers. Your daughter can now carry more water than your wife did when she was her age. Your son barely flinches when lifting a full grain sack. You feel a tiny swell of pride, nestled among the blisters and backaches. They're growing up hard, but they're growing. One day, while pulling the plow behind your own sweat-slick shoulders, you catch yourself daydreaming, not about kings or cities or warm beds, but about next year. Maybe you'll get a donkey, or find a smith who can fix the cart, or wild thought, build a second shed. Hope is weird like that. It creeps up when your guard is down. You barter with other villagers, offer to help them sow their plots if they lend you their animal for just a few hours. It works sometimes. People are tired, but they remember what it's like to be desperate. A couple of borrowed hours with a plow horse feels like winning the lottery. It saves your knees and gives your palms a brief vacation from the endless rubbing of ropes and wood. At night your hut smells like damp wool, fried onions and effort. You sleep with your legs tangled in scratchy blankets, your body humming with soreness. But it's a different kind of exhaustion now, less survival, more rebuilding. You notice the birds have changed too. No longer shrill, cold weather crows, but finches and robins singing like the world's about to do something wonderful. You tell your wife this. She smiles and says, "Don't jinx it." You don't. The reeve comes around, of course, sniffing for any signs of tax delinquency. You show him your call-used hands, your row of planted greens, and the receipt for 2 borrowed oxen hours. He seems unimpressed but leaves without a fine. You take that as a win. You talk to the wise woman about plant blight. She gives you some ash to sprinkle around the seedlings and mumbles something about toadstones. You nod solemnly and apply both. The ash probably helps. The toadstone might just be a shiny rock. But your lettuce looks vibrant. You're not complaining. One early morning you and your son pause to drink water from the stream. You notice how green everything is again. Not like last year, brighter, fresher, the kind of green that makes you think just for a moment that maybe this season will be better. Maybe this time you'll get through it without losing anything, or anyone. You nod toward your son, his face already sunburned and speckled with dirt. He grins, missing one front tooth. You smile back. It's not a miracle, but it'll do. And then it happens. You wake up one morning and there's buzzing. Not the dangerous kind, thankfully. Not a swarm of bees coming to reenact a pagan judgment or anything. No, it's a soft background buzz, the kind that says spring is truly here. You stretch your sore limbs and poke your head out the door. The fields are humming, not metaphorically, actually humming. Bees, flies, the wind through grass that finally has the nerve to grow tall. The world has clicked into motion again, and with that warm hum comes the return of the Lord's steward. Remember him? The one with the parchment face and permanent sneer. He's back, and he's got a list. The planting season may be in full swing, but so is tally season. The steward strolls through the village, checking on whose dues are late, whose cows calved, who mysteriously has 3 more chickens than last year. And for you, he has an announcement. The mill broke, again. Now, normally this wouldn't be your problem. You pay to use the Lord's mill, that's the rule. Even if you could grind your own grain on that flat river rock you hide behind the shed, you're not allowed to. The mill has a monopoly, sanctioned by generations of ink-stained charters and one particularly persistent squirrel that lives in the flour bag. But the mill is broken, and the steward says the villagers, yes, including you, must help rebuild it. There's a day of corvée labor ahead, dragging timber, repairing the water wheel, and wondering why this wooden contraption keeps falling apart like a toddler's toy made of wet bread. You show up, of course. If you don't, you're fined. And the fine is somehow always more than a week's worth of eggs and dignity. So you gather with other serfs, tools in hand, pretending you know how to repair mill gears with nothing but a mallet and blind optimism. Historians still argue whether corvée labor offered any actual communal benefit, or was just a nice way to mask exploitation under a layer of "we're all in this together" rhetoric. You have a theory. It's both. Someone hands you a wooden beam and says, "Don't drop this or the flower ghost gets angry." You assume that's a joke, until someone else nods gravely. There's always a story, isn't there? The rebuilding is miserable, of course. Your hands blister anew. Your shoulders feel like boiled leather by sundown. But there's a strange camaraderie to it. People groaning together, laughing at nothing, swapping stale jokes about whose goat farts loudest. You even share a turnip with a neighbor who usually acts like you owe him a sheep. Maybe you do. It's hard to keep track. In the evenings you limp back home. Your own planting still needs work. You've lost 2 days to mill repairs, and the potatoes are sulking. Your wife mentions that the peas look thirsty, and she might be right. You stare at them for 10 minutes trying to decide whether the leaves look droopy or just dramatic. At least you're sleeping better now. That deep swampy kind of sleep that swallows you whole and doesn't let go until the rooster screams, which he does, every morning, without fail, sometimes on your roof. Still, things are stabilizing. You've worked out a rhythm. You wake, you tend, you eat, you haul, you barter, you rest. It's not glamorous, but it keeps everyone alive. Then, because medieval life adores curveballs, the church announces a new festival. This time it's Rogation Tide. It's the season for praying over the crops and blessing the land. You walk the fields with the priest who mumbles Latin while someone else holds a cross high enough to make their arms shake. You chant along, mostly pretending, because let's face it, you know about 6 Latin words and one of them is Amen. There's an odd comfort to it though, a parade of villagers marching through rows of hopeful green, a mixture of ritual and rest, a borrowed holiness that turns your mud-crusted field into sacred ground, at least for the day. Quirky fact, during some Rogation processions people would beat the bounds, literally hitting the ground, or even children gently, with sticks to help them memorize the edges of the parish. You're grateful that your local priest settles for singing and sprinkling holy water. No one's whacking your kid with a boundary stick, thank you very much. Your wife hangs herbs by the door, not just for smell or superstition, though they do keep the house from smelling like a damp sock again. She swears it keeps bad luck out and the fertility in. You nod. Anything that might help those carrots actually show up this year is fine by you. One evening, you pass by the nearly rebuilt mill. It looks sturdy, for once. The wheel turns with a deep, satisfying churn. You wonder if it'll actually last the year, and just as you're about to head home, you spot a trader at the edge of the village path. He's got a handcart of trinkets and jars. Normally you wouldn't care, but today something glints. It's a bell, small, tinny, a bit dented. Your wife always wanted a bell for the goats, said it'd make them easier to find when they wander. You don't have much to trade, but you offer a handful of leeks and a carved spoon. He takes it. You walk home holding that bell like it's made of gold. That night, you attach it to the goat's neck. It jingles with every smug step she takes. Your daughter laughs. You smile. It's not much, but it feels like progress. And there's something else. You hear a whisper that a tanner passed through a nearby village. He's got hides. Maybe, just maybe you could trade for one. Get a new harness made. Maybe rig it into a makeshift ox yoke for the neighbor's donkey. Hope sneaks in again. It's quieter this time, less flashy. Just the steady rhythm of planted seeds, of wheels turning, of bells ringing on goat necks. It's enough. And as you close your eyes that night, curled beside your wife, listening to the soft bleat of animals and the creak of wood settling into rest, you realize something strange. You're not just surviving anymore, you're adapting. A few days after the goat bell victory, you wake up to a sound you haven't heard in weeks. Laughter. Real laughter. Not the tired chuckles villagers trade when the priest slips in mud or someone farts during Vespers, but the kind that bubbles up, uninvited, from a human being who's briefly forgotten how bleak things are. You peek outside and see a group of children playing near the edge of the barley field. They've fashioned a crude ball from rags and pig bladder. It's wobbling through the air, chasing squeals across the green, and for a second the whole village looks light. You, however, don't have time for lightness. The tanner rumor turns out to be true. He's set up 2 villages over, and word is he'll only stay a few days before moving east. You lace your shoes, well, wrap your feet in a convincing impression of shoes, and head out with the neighbor whose donkey you've been eyeing. You bring what you can carry: a basket of eggs, 2 coarse wool scarves, and a chicken with a passive-aggressive personality. It's not much, but in barter terms it might just buy you a small hide or 2. The journey's long through woods that smell like moss and regret. You pass a stone cross half swallowed by ivy. Nobody remembers who it's for. Maybe some knight, maybe just a fancy pilgrim. You shrug and move on. Eventually the tannery stench finds you before the tents do. It's eye-watering. Even the donkey looks personally offended. But there he is, the tanner, arms streaked in something you hope is mud. He's hunched over a rack of drying skins, humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like London Bridge, centuries early. Historians still argue whether tanners in rural villages had the social leprosy people claim. Some records suggest they were outcasts, while others say they were just regular folks who smelled like boiled cow feet. Either way, this guy doesn't care. He takes your trade with a grunt and hands you a folded hide. It's not fancy, it's stiff, but it's clean, and it's yours. You and your neighbor trudge back in silence, each lost in plans. You're already imagining the straps you'll cut, the way it'll hold together the jury-rigged plow you've been assembling from shame and splinters. Back in the village, things are shifting. Slowly, yes, like a wagon in mud, but shifting nonetheless. You're seeing more barter activity. Someone's got a pot of honey from a wild hive they raided. Someone else has extra rye flour. You trade that flour for a promise. A neighbor with a stronger plow animal offers to till half your back field in exchange for help repairing their leaking roof. It's like this favor for favor, sweat for sweat, that the village economy weaves itself together. Forget coins. They're for lords and sheriffs and the occasional unfortunate minstrel who wanders in asking for lodging and stew and leaves with fleas. You build your plough harness with the new hide, and it holds. Not perfectly, one strap frays like a defiant noodle, but it holds. The donkey, surprisingly cooperative. Maybe she missed having purpose, or maybe she just likes being told she's pretty. You tell her every morning now, just in case. And then, suddenly, it rains. Not the delicate kind that drizzles poetry over the thatch. No, this is aggressive rain, righteous rain. Rain that soaks through every seam of your clothing and seems determined to reach your bones. The roads become sludge. The pigs go feral with delight. You, however, are less amused. Still, the crops are grateful. The peas finally stop sulking. The carrots look smug. Even the turnips have forgiven you for planting them upside down again. Quirky side note. Some medieval farmers genuinely believed that whispering encouragement to seeds helped them grow. You don't quite go that far, but your wife swears she saw you singing to the cabbage, and you don't deny it. The rain passes, eventually. The ground dries enough for the shoes to stop suctioning off your feet with every step. You gather with the others near the village common for the feast of Saint Isidore, the patron saint of farmers. Now, you're not overly pious, but you show up. There's food, there's song. There's a performance involving two very drunk men and a broom dressed as a bishop. It's charming, and for a moment you forget how close you came to ruin. You catch yourself smiling. Even the steward, sour as he is, nods at you as he passes. Either he's acknowledging your efforts, or he has wind and doesn't want to stop walking. You accept the gesture regardless. That night, full of lentil stew and almost warm, you return home. You light a little tallow candle. The shadows dance lazily across the walls. Your daughter shows you a drawing, 3 stick goats and what might be a smiling potato, which she insists is you. You hang it up with pride. As you tuck into bed, you glance out at the barn. The donkey sleeps peacefully. The goat bell gives a tiny chime. You breathe in deep, damp hay, wood smoke, that faint comforting smell of a home that's been fought for. You made it, not to glory, not to wealth, but to something sturdier. Your back still aches, your hands are still rough, but you've turned disaster into habit, into routine, into life. You dream, that night, of next year's planting, and maybe, just maybe, a real ox. Spring ripens into summer, and the village exhales with something that almost resembles optimism. The crops, surprisingly, survive, not thrive. Let's not get carried away, but they stand tall, waving politely in the wind, like they know they've been spared. You, meanwhile, have reached a rhythm. Wake up, check on the donkey, haul water, work the fields, patch your tunic with questionable stitching, barter, curse the bugs, sleep, repeat. But just when things feel predictable, something strange happens. The steward arrives one morning with an announcement. He's unusually sober and smells less like disappointment than usual, which already puts you on edge. The reeve is stepping down, he says, voice thick with disinterest. New one needs choosing. Lord's orders. You blink. This affects you. You see, the reeve is the village's own little despot, elected from among the serfs to make sure everyone's paying their dues, keeping the peace, and most importantly, not burning things they shouldn't. A middleman, part enforcer, part snitch, part human complaint box. And now, there's a chance you could become him. You shudder, but someone, some traitor, suggests your name. Now, you're not exactly a pillar of leadership. You once got lost trying to follow your own footprints in snow, but people remember that time you bartered for the goat bell and fixed the plough and didn't completely collapse into existential sobbing when the ox died. Apparently, that's enough. Elections for Reeve are, let's be honest, more performance than democracy. There's no parchment ballots, no stirring campaign speeches, no vote for honest Jeff slogans. It's more like a noisy game of not it, until the least disliked person is left blinking awkwardly while everyone else claps. Historians still argue whether reeves held genuine authority or were more like convenient scapegoats for everything that went wrong. Evidence leans both ways. What's clear though is that no one really wants the job. You try to protest. You point out your poor memory, your complete lack of charisma, and your tendency to sleepwalk during times of stress, but the steward claps you on the back and says, "Perfect, you'll fit right in," and just like that you're reeve. Your first task, organize the harvest tally. This means going house to house, counting sacks of barley, wheat, peas and vegetables. You must write it all down, by which they mean you squint at a wax tablet and try to make marks that won't later resemble angry geese. It's awkward, this power. People you've shared turnip stew with now look at you like you might fine them for hoarding oats. You try to keep things fair. You take only what's due to the Lord. You wink at the old man who still insists his hens lay eggs only on Tuesdays. You even help carry sacks for the widow with the twisted foot. Still, you notice a shift. People pause when you approach. Jokes dry up. You've become something new, authority. Fragile, reluctant authority, sure, but still, there are perks. You get a little more bread, a spot near the fire during feast days, and the steward actually nods when you speak. Once, but there are drawbacks too. When two brothers get into a fist fight over a wheelbarrow, you have to settle it. When the miller's boy accuses the blacksmith of stealing his socks which are later found on a goose, you're the one who has to investigate. When the chapel roof leaks again, someone asks if the reeve can do something about it, as if you have a hotline to God and a spare ladder. Still, you adapt. You start carrying a little stick, not for punishment, heavens no, but for presence. People respect the stick. You learn to furrow your brow thoughtfully, even when you have no idea what someone's complaining about. You master the art of listening with a look that says both fascinating and please stop talking. One day the steward presents you with a real test. A traveling friar arrives, and he's asking questions, big ones, like why the villagers don't pay more alms, why the fields are worked on saints' days, why nobody seems to be building a new chapel, despite the last one being mostly mold and beetles. You do your best. You smile. You offer him soup. You explain that piety is hard when your main focus is not dying of root rot. He's unimpressed, but after 3 days and one unfortunate night spent sleeping near the compost, he moves on. You breathe easier. Later that week, the steward calls you aside and surprises you. "You're not the worst reeve we've had," he grunts. "Keep at it." Praise, in medieval terms. You feel oddly proud. Quirky tidbit. Some reeves historically used geese as early warning systems to catch thieves sneaking around at night. The birds were notoriously loud and better than dogs at detecting trouble. You're now considering acquiring 2 or 3 geese with attitude. By midsummer the harvest season begins. This is the real test. Everything you've worked for, all the compost, the ploughing, the praying, comes to this. Fields are golden, air smells like hay and effort, and the village buzzes with the feverish energy of people racing daylight and storms. As reeve you don't get to just harvest. You coordinate. You ensure the Lord's portion is gathered first. You track labor rotations. You make sure the grain is measured, the sheaves are stacked, and the ox someone else's, lucky them, doesn't wander into the river again. You work dawn to dusk, scratching records on tablets, hauling buckets, comforting panicked villagers when a thunderstorm threatens to flatten half the rye. You also sneak breaks, quick ones, just long enough to sit under your favorite tree and remember what it felt like when you were just a serf with a goat bell and a broken plow. You sip water. You hum a tune. You remember your wife's face the day you told her you'd fix things and how, somehow you kind of did. And you wonder what's next, because things are better now. Not perfect, but better. The donkey still kicks occasionally. Your knees still ache, and the chickens remain as deranged as ever. But you have food. You have neighbors who, if not love you, at least tolerate you with respect. You've survived, and you're learning what it means to lead, and somewhere deep down a voice says, maybe you were meant to. The wheat is in, the peas are drying, and the air has taken on that unmistakable smell of autumn, earthy, sharp, and just a bit like wet burlap. You've survived the harvest without anyone accidentally setting the hay on fire, which is frankly a miracle. Even the steward didn't scowl quite as deeply this time. Things are strangely calm, but you know better. Calm in a medieval village is just the deep inhale before something chaotic shows up wearing a smile, and right on cue it does. A tax collector. You hear the clop of hooves before you see him. A real horse, mind you, not the mule your lord rides, but an actual shiny-coated, well-fed, smug-looking horse. And on its back a man in robes too clean to have ever seen dirt, smelling of wax and arrogance, with a ledger the size of your torso. He dismounts with the slow precision of someone who believes peasants exist only to hold doors open for him. "I am here," he announces, "to reconcile dues owed to his lordship the Earl of..." And then a name so long it curls like a ribbon in your brain. You stop listening somewhere around thrice blessed. You as Reeve are expected to assist. That's a generous way of saying you're going to do all the actual work while he points at things. Now, tax collection in medieval times isn't exactly IRS level paperwork, it's more performative. The tax collector reads a list of impossible numbers, then you scramble to figure out how to convert 3 sacks of lentils, 1 goat, and a bundle of flax into a unit of measurement known only to the Earl and the angels. The villagers line up with their offerings, mostly grain, cheese wheels, occasional cloth, and one very confused duck. The tax collector scoffs at nearly everything. This barley is underweight. That cheese smells aggressive. Is this duck winking at me? You try to mediate, to smooth things over. You translate the peasant's growls into polite protest, and the tax collector's sighs into something that won't incite a riot. It's a delicate job, and one you're profoundly undertrained for, but you manage, sort of. By dusk the tax collector has taken his share, sniffed disdainfully at the state of the roads, and left with promises to report back with suggestions, which everyone knows means complain to someone fancier. Still, no punishments are handed down, no one gets dragged off in chains. The duck is returned. You count that as a win. Later the villagers host a harvest feast. It's modest as always, but warm. There's music played on cracked flutes and hand drums, the kind that sound more like collapsing furniture than rhythm, but you love it anyway. The children chase each other, laughing with the freedom of people who don't yet understand winter. Someone hands you a cup of cider. It's sharp and sweet, and you sit by the fire while smoke curls into the sky like prayers you forgot to say. This is the rhythm of your life now. Heavy, repetitive, but not without reward. A few weeks later the first frost comes. You wake to fields dusted in white. Your breath clouds the air as you wrap your cloak tighter and make the rounds. The animals grumble. The villagers move slower. You remind everyone to store firewood, to patch walls, to tuck away anything they don't want frozen solid, and you check in with the vulnerable. There's old Meg, who still believes her cat can predict the weather. Spoiler, it cannot. She's low on candles and cabbage, so you bring her both. There's the crippled shepherd boy, whose one good leg is nearly frostbitten. You organize a repair of his roof with 2 lads and a generous bribe of ale. Historians still argue whether medieval communities genuinely supported their sick and poor out of compassion or survival logic. But here now, it doesn't matter. You help because someone has to. Because you remember what it felt like when the ox died and everything seemed impossible. The wind howls more often now. The days are short and grey. Snow flirts with the edges of the village, threatening to smother everything in silence. And the steward, well, he's gone quiet too. You've heard rumours that the Lord is ill, that bandits have taken to the forests again, that next spring's levies may be harsher. You don't know which stories are true, which are just fear in a different costume, but you prepare anyway. You double-check grain stores. You arrange a new bartering system for firewood. You even attempt to fix the broken cart axle that everyone's been ignoring for 3 years. And then, just as winter settles fully in, another surprise. Your wife tells you she's pregnant. You stare at her, slack-jawed and blinking like a cow caught in church. She laughs, actually laughs, a sound so rare it startles the chickens. You don't know whether to panic or dance, probably both. Children are blessings, yes, but also loud, hungry, chaotic, and if we're being honest, very good at smearing dung on things you thought were clean. Still, hope, new life, a future. You lie awake that night staring at the ceiling, heart pounding like a festival drum. You think of names, of what kind of world your child will inherit, of whether they'll grow up cursing the mud or laughing in it. You promise, silently, to make it work, to never let the ox die again, metaphorically speaking of course, because there is no ox, there is only you, your donkey, a cart full of cabbage, and a village that somehow didn't fall apart. Quirky tidbit of the night. In some villages, expectant mothers were given a charm called a birthing girdle, a strip of parchment or cloth inscribed with prayers and saints' names, wrapped around the belly to protect both mother and child. No one's offered you one yet, but you're not above fashioning a knockoff version out of old rope and wishful thinking. Snow finally blankets the village one morning in early December. The world goes quiet. Everything slows, even the chickens seem thoughtful, and you, sitting by the hearth, watching the fire crackle, realize something unexpected. You've become content, not rich, not powerful, not famous, but solid, rooted, a tree in winter still but alive, the kind of person who, if the ox were to die again, might actually know what to do this time. You wake one morning in late December to the sound of silence, not the usual muffled hush of snow or the creaky stillness of frostbitten wood. No, this is different. It's that eerie, almost sacred silence that falls when a heavy snowfall traps everything in place, like the village has been wrapped up in wool and told to rest. The roof groans under the weight of the snow. You push open the door and are met with a blinding wall of white. It's up to your thighs and still falling, fat, lazy flakes that tumble like feathers from some heavenly pillow fight. You sneeze 3 times. The cold air stabs your lungs like tiny daggers. Welcome to midwinter, when survival depends more on planning and patience than anything else. The villagers are hibernating in their own ways. Smoke curls from chimneys like sleepy sighs. No one's shouting, no one's moving much. Even the animals are quieter, either tucked away or half frozen into acceptance. Inside your cottage, things are warmer, not by much, but enough that you don't see your breath every time you speak. Your wife is knitting something, possibly a scarf, possibly a lumpy sock. She swears it's for the baby, the one growing steadily beneath layers of wool and blankets. You've made your peace with becoming a father, sort of. You still wake up some nights gripped by a sudden fear that you'll drop the child into a puddle or forget to feed it. But then you remember you've kept chickens alive for over a year, and you didn't even like those. Surely this will be easier, right? Today's project is repairing a leak in the ceiling. You climb into the crawl space, muttering curses at whoever invented roofs, and discover a squirrel's nest. 2 blinking eyes stare back at you. It chirps like it's judging your craftsmanship. You leave the nest alone and shift the thatch gently aside. Congratulations, you now have a tenant. Winter passes like this, slow, strange, occasionally absurd. The reeve's duties are lighter in these months, but not non-existent. You still inspect the granary, still make rounds checking in on the elderly, still help plan spring plowing logistics that will inevitably go awry. And most importantly, you manage the disputes, because even snow can't freeze gossip. 2 families argue over firewood. Another claims someone stole a chicken, though it turns out the chicken was hiding under a bench. Someone else accuses their neighbor of witchcraft because they made soup that tasted unnaturally good. You nod solemnly through these disputes, knowing full well the truth is usually people are bored and cold and starting to smell like old stew. Cabin fever existed long before cabins. Still, these little dramas are part of the village's pulse. You mediate with soft words, redirect their energy. You even invent a game involving tossing pine cones at a bucket to keep the teenagers from burning things. Historians still argue whether rural medieval people truly experienced winter depression as we understand it. But watching the way everyone becomes just a little off during these weeks, you're convinced they did. and probably blamed it on spirits or cheese. But despite the long nights and the icicles forming on your eyelashes, something unexpected begins to happen. You start dreaming again. Not just the usual anxiety-fueled images of talking pigs and falling ladders. No, real dreams. Dreams of warmer days, of summer fields, of the child you haven't met yet, tugging at your sleeve, of the ox, not dead, but whole again, pulling you forward into something better. They're small dreams, but they're yours. And slowly, as the calendar flips invisibly into a new year, signs of change appear. The snow starts to melt, just a little. Enough to leave muddy patches like bruises on the landscape. You spot the first robin. The air smells faintly less like damp straw and more like hope. You can even hear the river again groaning beneath the thawing ice. Spring will come, not all at once. It will stumble, fall back into winter, then burst forward again with chaotic fury. But it's coming. And with it, planting season lambs, the return of relentless bugs, and 1,000 new things to worry about. You're ready, sort of. The final quirky tidbit for tonight. In some villages it was considered good luck to bury a slice of bread under the threshold on the first thaw of the year, to ensure abundance in the spring. You make a mental note to try it. Can't hurt, especially not with the baby arriving soon. And so, here you are. 1 year after the ox died, you've rebuilt, you've made mistakes, you've laughed, cried, bartered, patched things with twine, bribed chickens with oats, and maybe, just maybe, found a way to live that doesn't feel like merely surviving. You are still a serf, but you're also a father, a leader, a keeper of warmth and memory and humor, even in the mud. You've built something that resembles a life, and in a time when nothing is guaranteed, not the weather, not your health, not the availability of decent onions. That's no small thing. The world outside is still dark, but the fire inside flickers steady. The baby kicks, you smile, and the ox, well, let's not talk about the ox. Let's just say if one were to appear again, you'd know exactly what to do. The snow quiets everything now. The last embers of the fire glow low, casting soft amber shadows across the floor. The world has slowed to a heartbeat, gentle, steady, reassuring. Your body sinks into the furs. Every breath is slower now, deeper. The ache in your bones fades as the warmth wraps around you like an old friend. The worries of planting and taxing and childbirth blur into a distant fog, replaced by nothing but stillness. You can hear the creak of the rafters above, the soft shuffle of your wife shifting in sleep. Even the animals have stopped fussing. Outside, the wind stirs gently, brushing against the walls like a lullaby written in leaves and frost. There's nothing left to fix tonight. No broken wheels, no missing goats, no greedy stewards tapping their ledgers. Just this moment, and the steady hum of a world turning slowly, faithfully, toward the light. Maybe tomorrow, the first crocus will push through the frozen soil. Maybe not. Either way, you're ready. You've learned to live inside the rhythm of the earth, to rest when it rests, to hope when it stirs. For now, let your thoughts drift like snowflakes, soft, quiet, unhurried. You've done enough. You are enough. Let the village sleep. Let the fire burn low, and let yourself at long last fall gently into dreams.